This is episode 4, chicken, take 1.
Chicken!
It's fine.
I get the first one out of the way.
All right. Get your giggles out. It's cool.
This is Hard Reset, a series about rebuilding our world from scratch.
Hello, and welcome to the Hard Reset podcast. I'm Nick Tucker, and I'm here with Taylor Hamilton.
Hello.
We're the co-creators of Hard Reset, which is a show about reimagining the world from scratch and looking at the technologies, the ideas, the innovations that would allow us to rebuild that world from scratch. We're joined today by Rob Chapman-Smith.
Hi, I'm the editor-in-chief of Freethink.
And Toby Morishano.
Hey, I'm the community manager at Freethink.
So this episode of the podcast, we're going to be talking about our 4th episode of Hard Reset, which was all about cell-cultured chicken meat. We went and filmed in Singapore, where a company called Just is bringing cell-cultured chicken to the marketplace. One of the first companies to be able to do this. So they had a restaurant in Singapore where they were actually selling this meat to customers, and so we were able to interview them and see what that was like. So we're excited to share this with you and dive in deep to this subject. We want to be able to talk about the things we couldn't get into in the episode because we ran out of time, and we want to be able to answer your questions that you brought up in the comments. So please stick around as we dive into this very meaty subject. It was good, right?
That was a solid intro.
I guess we should start by talking a little bit about what this episode is about so the people who haven't seen the original Hard Reset episode. If you haven't, please go ahead and check it out. But this episode is all about growing meat in bioreactors and being able to sell that as a product. And the big difference here between the way we normally grow meat is that we don't have to grow a whole animal with the rest of that meat.
Yep.
So I'm curious, from your perspective, Taylor, what made this a hard reset for you?
I think it's just totally thinking differently about, do you need to have a whole animal that you're killing and slaughtering every time that you're eating meat? And the faux turkey and like faux chicken and like soy, that's just, it's really not for me. Those are plants that are trying to be something that's approximating meat, and to me just tastes terrible. And so with this, it's actual meat, right? And so eating actual meat but not killing the animal and thinking about, like, is that gross? Like, why do I want to do that? Does that actually bother me? That to me feels very much like a hard reset.
Yeah, I think one of the things I loved about this the most was that it did make me a little uncomfortable, even though I couldn't quite define why. And then to me, that's always a good sign, that like it forces you to really understand why, what boundaries are being crossed that you haven't articulated yet.
Well, a lot of the headlines that you're hearing for, the last decade plus are about, GMOs and all these, like, we're doing all this stuff with our food and it's all genetically altered and what does that mean? And it's all artificial and all these other things. But, we've been doing massive things to the whole agricultural system for decades and decades. And this is really no different, except it seems to actually be doing something that is going to taste as good, if not better.
Right.
Here's what I really want from the episode. I really want the chicken sashimi.
Oh, you want to eat raw chicken?
I want to eat raw chicken. That's really what it comes down to.
You can, you just don't want to get sick from it.
Yeah, I've done this a couple times in Japan, and you're just like, this might be bad for the rest of my week. But, their whole thing is that if they're growing these things in bioreactors and it's all like medical grade, et cetera, and you're not, you don't have a real chicken. So there's not all this like poop and stuff that's getting cross-contaminated. You just have the meat. So you can just conceivably eat that raw.
Yeah. I mean, like Toby and Rob said, you can eat the meat already, but just once.
Yeah. You might be suffering.
Yeah. Definitely kind of an intriguing idea of like, what does a raw chicken cutlet taste like? Yeah. I would never want to find that out in real life, but with cell-cultured meat, it starts to open up interesting
steak tartare, chicken tartare.
We thought we were rebooting chicken. Turns out we're rebooting sushi.
Yeah.
Rob, I'm curious for you, what's the big deal that you think that audiences should be latching onto here?
Well, I think the humanity, as it's one of our biggest superpowers, is our ability to just control the world around us, control the levers of nature in ever-increasing resolution. And for us to be at a point where we can actually take things that, it took millions of years, billions of years of evolution to like perfect and get into a thing. And it takes a whole bunch of energy in order to actually get a chicken to exist in its form. But no, we can just do it in a vat now. Like that's wild. And so I think it's such a huge, when thinking about it as like a hard reset or something that the audience needs to pay attention to, just the fact that we are here at this point and this is a real thing that we're doing. And this is something that if you went to Singapore, you could go and eat this cell-cultured meat. I think that's just something that more people should be aware of, that that's where we are in terms of humans' ability to manipulate our biology, the biology that surrounds us. And that's utterly fascinating to me.
Right. Yeah, this is one of those technologies I've been super excited about for a long time. I think definitely inspired by science fiction, reading about it and books like The Expanse and other places like that.
Sure.
But also just from like a sustainability point of view, I'm super excited about the possibilities for this, just because as a avowed meat eater, I also sort of hate the fact that it is so water intensive and it does have these huge carbon outputs. And I think I would like to be able to do this without also murdering animals, although we should discuss that word murder because I know that it's not quite murder. It's whatever. Anyway, it's a debatable subject.
What is murder?
I mean, different podcast.
That's a different podcast, yeah. It's a question we should answer at some point.
I'm down to turn this into a true crime podcast.
We'll get a lot of money though.
Yeah.
Well, to your point about the sustainability, and this is also sort of part of it, I mean, so much of what has shaped human civilization is our relationship with food.
Right.
How we grow it and how we get it and how we consume it. And to have another technological entry point into that is a lot more constrained and concentrated is a fascinating development for us to have. And if we can scale these things, it will change society, because every time we change the way we eat, we change and grow our foods, we change society. So the potential impacts of this are astronomical if we can get this all to work.
Yeah. I mean, looking at human history, agriculture and animal husbandry are like the most two essential things that allowed human civilization to sort of begin.
Yeah.
And all the other things that we think of, those early technologies that have allowed, they all really start there, of like being able to control your food supply. And being able to do that at this scale with this level of control is really transformative.
Well, I also think about how the entire world was essentially colonized because, people want some better spices. It's a little reductionist, but like, I need a little salt and pepper with this food that I'm eating. And so let me just, go enslave this entire country worth of people in order to, pepper my...
You keep bringing this up. I can't imagine what's going on.
It's crazy to me when I think about the fact that you had thousands and tens of thousands of people boarding ships to go to someplace that they did not know where it was.
Right.
Because they're like, this thing tastes a little bland to me.
Have you had British food?
Yeah. So, to your point, like, so much of what we do as humans is driven by our need to not only nourish ourselves, but to nourish ourselves in a way that is like just in a really good way. Like, we want to eat good things. And so why is this happening right now? Well, there's a lot more people becoming middle class and a lot more demand for meat happening. And so all those projections are saying, we cannot afford as an entire collective of the earth to have everyone eating as much meat as we all want to eat.
Right.
And so we have to do something like this.
Yeah, I think that's why it really is a hard reset, is because if you were rebuilding the civilization from scratch, there's no way you would do it with animal agriculture the way we're doing it now, because it is so unsustainable. So to me, that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest change in our civilization. And then there's the sort of emotional and conceptual, attachment to food. It was interesting to me that you said, like, oh, I don't want meat made from plants. That's unnatural. I want meat made in bioreactors.
Well, it just, what is it? Like, if it's a plant, I want it to, like, somewhat approximate what a plant is when I'm eating the final thing, right? It's when it isn't what it says it is that it starts to get weird. I'm also, by the way, very down to eat something that I'm not exactly sure what's inside, like chorizo or like a hot dog, where you're just like, I'm not sure what is all in here.
Is that a ring?
And I thought that was actually one of the really interesting things about what Just is doing with this, is that they're doing this like chicken nugget. It's like gonna be deep fried. And so the actual like meat itself is like, there's a lot of other things that are happening besides like the pure thing there, right? A lot of times when you say the word chicken, and I'm going to eat chicken, you're thinking about slicing this chicken and like really enjoying and savoring this.
I'm thinking about a deep fryer. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm thinking about it.
You're thinking about a deep fryer. Like, give me that Popeye's chicken sandwich, right? Or you're mincing all that meat together and you're, putting it in a taco and so a lot of what we
Is it deep fried before it goes in the taco?
Will you only eat deep fried things? Is that your stance?
I'm just saying there's an optimal preparation for chicken.
Yeah, I mean, we don't tend, a lot of the cuisine that is around meat isn't like about necessarily celebrating meat in this kind of like purest form, right? We're mixing it, we're stuffing it with other stuff, we're putting cheese in it, if you're at Nick's house, apparently you're deep frying everything.
Just chicken. Just chicken, to be honest. Okay.
And so if that's the case, then you can get away with a lot of things like they are where, the chicken piece is really small and it's going to be more in like a nugget form. You don't have to like have bones in it and all these other things that they're not quite able to do yet with the technology.
Right.
Also, I just said technology to apply to food, and that's just like very disturbing to my head. But
why is that disturbing?
You just don't want to think about technology and food in the same sentence, even though it very much is. Like this is like the product itself is directly a technology.
I see what you're saying.
And it's just like, I don't want to eat silicon chips. You know what I mean?
They're really good for
fry them.
They're great with salsa. I mean, technology really is just a term we use for new things that we do. Like when something is so ubiquitous and it just works, we don't call it a technology anymore. But when it was new, like keeping animals around was like, look at this high tech crap over here that Ugg is doing by his cave. Like he's got the goats and that's super high tech. Like that's technology for its day. Agriculture was a high tech endeavor when we first started doing it. Now it's just ubiquitous and it works all the time. So we don't call it technology.
Yeah. I mean, that to me is the thing that in terms of like directing and making this episode became really difficult because you're just like, okay, well, there's all these reasons why this just makes sense. Right. So what is it about this that is actually like the challenge conceptually? And it is all around culture and adoption. Mm-hmm. And so talking about this in the same way that we're talking about beer, it's like, you like beer? You know how beer gets made? Well, what if your chicken is made the same way? You're like, okay, well, I do drink a lot of beer. So I'm okay with this.
Right.
There was a comment that was in the video that came up a lot in the comments, which was, anything is weird unless you're used to it.
Right.
People really latched onto that, and I think that's kind of encapsulates it.
Yeah. And
it's also interesting to me. I always read comments that are like, oh, this is not natural. I wouldn't eat it. It's artificial meat. And I'm like, have you eaten Taco Bell? Have you eaten KFC? Like growing up, the rumor that I heard was that KFC was like these Frankenstein chickens with 7 breasts and drumsticks, and we still ate it. Like it was that didn't deter us.
Yeah, that urban legend is terrifying, and yet, it didn't slow anyone down. Like sales were through the roof.
Yeah, it's also like natural seems to be like a moving target for people.
Yeah,
and it sort of just is in general. It's just what we are used to is that's the natural thing, but like nothing about our food process is natural. If we weren't here, none of these things would exist. And so like, I don't know where to draw the line, so to speak, because what's the difference between us doing regular animal husbandry and what we're doing with the cell-cultured meat? We're just using different tactics and tools.
Yeah.
But it's still intervention compared to what would just exist in the wild, so to speak, if we were not here.
It's also interesting because it's decentralized. It's like, it's not like we all have to collectively decide, is this okay or not?
Right.
It's like one country like Singapore is going to approve it. Some people are going to develop this. Some people are going to sell it. Some people are going to try it. Maybe you'll try it at some point if you're comfortable with it, or if you're not, you don't have to.
Well, I think one of the things to your point that we weren't able to cover in this episode is why Singapore? Why is this happening in Singapore first and nowhere else? And part of it is like that society just in general is a lot more collectivist, right? As opposed to like our individualist kind of perspective over here in the United States. It's also a really small country. So it's like 1% of their land is dedicated to farms. So you just have a demand for meat that is ever increasing, going to be like, I think 30% higher by the end of 2030. And you have like a country where people are like, we can all get together and agree on this. Whereas the idea of introducing something like cell-cultured meat to Americans first, I mean, one of the things that we cut out from the piece was this guy that was talking about boneless chicken wings.
That's right.
And he went to a city council meeting and was like, "Oh, we have to. We can't do this anymore. We can't call this boneless chicken.
We can't call them wings.
Yeah, we can't call it wings because it's breast meat."
I go into nice family restaurants and I see people throwing this name around and pretending as though everything is just fine. I'm talking about boneless chicken wings. I propose that we as a city remove the name boneless wings from our menus and from our hearts.
Right.
Yeah, it's not actually the wing.
It's very different.
Yeah.
He's not wrong. All of that rant that he gives is 100% accurate.
Okay, so I actually did have a question for you all here.
Okay.
So right now, all this meat that they're making with Just is made off of cells from chicken breast.
I know where you're going with this, and I like it.
What is your favorite part of the chicken?
Oh, thigh or drumstick?
That is an or. You need to pick one.
Thigh.
Thigh.
The whole leg.
The whole leg.
How could he do? That's the same thing I did.
What part?
The whole thing. It's connected.
Just if you had to pick
if I had to pick one of the two, it would be the thigh.
Thigh.
That's right.
The nugget.
No. So is that chicken breast?
Well, I'm a vegetarian, so.
Were you always a vegetarian?
Since I was 10.
Oh,
Like
wow.
when you were 9, what was your favorite part? Or when you have a moment of weakness as a vegetarian and you're looking at someone scarfing down a chicken, what part of you are like, yeah, I could totally get down with that?
I guess the drumstick, because it's more visceral and it's more interesting. Like chicken breast just looks like the same thing I eat in,
It's
as a
the
vegetarian,
vodka of
as a
meats.
soy version.
It's basically just a mixer. It's like it's the most bland protein source ever.
Unless you deep fry it. Because I think this is what Chick-fil-A does.
Hello.
Oh, so well every day except for on Sundays. Here's what I've been thinking. I also agree. Thigh is the way to go.
Right.
Why didn't they start with the thigh? It used to be for me the wing, but I'm just too lazy to be picking around all these bones at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if part of that is if the protein itself is different, or as much as the protein of the thigh just is intermingled with other things in that area of like more fat, more kinds of tissues, connective tissues, and things like that get melted into it when you cook it. And how much of what makes dark meat is the protein itself, and all the things that are kind of built around it. And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, I know dark meat is much more fatty than white meat in chicken. So, yeah, perhaps there's something there, and they just haven't figured out the science.
Right.
But I would agree. If I could buy a cell cultured thigh right now, I would buy it despite the cost. 'Cause I wouldn't eat it.
At any price, cultured thigh meat.
I hope the second thing they make is just one of those Renaissance fair turkey legs.
Yeah, let's go.
Gigantic.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you talk about as the wonderful narrator, give me that narrator voice real quick.
This is Hard Reset.
Yeah, so as that is that in the future, they'll be able to 3D print bones that can be infused with the chicken meat. And
I don't know why you would 3D print a bone instead of just like a popsicle stick, but sure.
Well, what would you want? Would you want just like chicken meat on a stick?
I mean, if it came pre-breaded, that would make it better.
Right. I don't know. You talk
3D print in the carbs so that I could just splash it right into the oil, and then I'm good.
I don't know. You talk about like a chicken ribeye.
Or chicken ribeye would be amazing.
Right. And like bones actually add flavor.
Sure.
And that's one of the things that would be awesome to like, that is one of the things you would lose if you couldn't replicate bones. Like I spent like a while, a weekend ago, making bone broth, and it's like, kind of adds a lot of flavor to stuff.
It does.
A lot.
And so if they can't find a way to replicate that, then I might not purchase those things as much.
Yeah.
So.
I just want them to 3D print a skull with meat around it so I can bite into it.
We're getting dark.
Vegetarian.
Vegetarian went. Look at the
vegetarian over here,
You weren't doing it to save the animals from like in general. You were just doing it to save them from you.
It's part of. It's actually it's a condition of his probation.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
So my daughter just turned 1 year old, and so I'm already starting to anticipate, like when she's a teenager, all the ways that she's going to yell at me, tell me that I'm making poor choices in my life. So or things that we used to do back in the day were crazy. Like my mom said that she only drank soda like the entire time she was a kid. Like no one like drank water. And you hear that now, you're like, that's insane. Right. And I feel like in 20 years, it could be a very similar thing with regards to meat that comes directly from the animal.
Right.
And like our kids and, that next generation beta or whatever it will be. Are they going to be called Generation Beta? We'll see.
Hope not.
Someone said I was asking that online, and someone was saying a Generation Alpha or something like that.
No, Generation Alpha was next, but I'm saying like the generation after that, Generation Beta, what are they going to say? I've been thinking about what I should be doing now while it's still okay, because it might not be okay in like 20 years to be.
This is the equivalent of like Mad Men, where it's like, oh, you were smoking and drinking and doing all these terrible things.
Yes.
But now move it forward 60 years, and it's like you were eating animals, you were killing real animals, like that sort of thing. You just want to get all that out of your system.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pandemic just showed us, or at least showed me, just how much of like your decisions about your actual health care have to do with what everybody else is doing. Mm-hmm. So I remember going to the grocery store with a mask on before anybody else was. And I felt like a psychopath. I was like...
To be fair, it was a ski mask.
I was like, I look crazy right now. And I feel crazy. Should I be doing this? Is this like overblown and blah, blah, blah? And then like 3 days later, everybody was wearing a mask. Mm-hmm. And it was like, oh, okay, this is okay now, right?
Right.
And so what are those things that as an entire... Like, it is okay to eat meat right now. For most people, right? Most people, even like vegetarians or vegans, I don't know, I'm getting some cross eyes from Toby. They might silently judge you, but it's like still pretty socially acceptable. Like, what is the point when that actually flips and changes? Well, and what are the big things that are going to take to do that?
For a while, when I was traveling around doing a lot of freelance filmmaking, when I was traveling, I would try to eat just vegetarian, because traveling and eating a lot of meat kind of is, while awesome, can make you feel a little bit not great. And I remember in Texas, I asked the waitress what she recommended that was vegetarian, and she said, "What's wrong with you?" And I just had to like explain to her the whole situation. She was very relieved. She was like, "Oh, okay, well, we have this thing." And I'm like, "I'll have that thing." I don't even remember what it was. It was probably like
brisket.
It was probably like a veggie burger or something, you know. But it's that sort of thing now, where like in some places in this country where it's like, if you aren't eating meat, a lot of people will be like, "What is wrong with you?" Yeah. Like, and that's, and I think you're right, that I think in 20, 30 years, that will swing into a very different direction.
Well, and also, what are the places and times when you're eating cell-cultured meat? Mm-hmm. And then when are you not eating cell-cultured meat, but you're actually eating like a real chicken? And like, what are those dishes where you're really celebrating? And I think one of the things is like when you're really actually celebrating the animal, when it actually has the bones and you're really seeing it and you're really, enjoying it. And you're like, nah, this is something died so I can do this.
And you're talking about that more from like a culinary perspective, right?
Absolutely.
Like
I think that's the only way that this moves forward in a major way, is that I do think that there's the eaters that we have to be thinking about and talking about. But you go to a restaurant right now and 95% of the entree dishes are meat-based.
Well, yeah.
Right? And so it's part of that is like, chefs also thinking about, okay, well, how do we make something that is really going to be tasty, but isn't quite as meat forward?
Yeah. Well, I think the other way that this becomes at scale is just because it becomes so cheap. Right. And there's a whole host of people who get food only from government subsidies, or they go to the cheapest places where they're able to get food. And if this becomes cheaper than traditional animal husbandry, then it's just going to win. Because at the end of the day, money, cash rules everything around me, right? Like it's just going to win. And so I could see it proliferating that way. And then the traditional animal husbandry becomes a luxury that you're like, oh, I want to go for the traditional meat style thing, and that's what you'll get at the restaurants and only Gordon Ramsay types. But
that kind of beef will be like the Kobe beef we know.
Yeah,
now.
exactly.
Like, this is a specialty good, a luxury experience kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a child as well who's about 2, and I eat fake meat, but my wife and him eat real meat. But sometimes, we'll have like Impossible beef, and when I'm feeding it, I just like, this is beef. I don't try to explain to him what you know, the whole process is. And so he's going to grow up thinking beef is just that thing that tastes that way, rather than necessarily something that specifically comes from an animal. And then when if lab grown meat enters that space, it'll just become like another source of the same thing, perhaps.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the space where these products will take foothold first, is that ground or processed kind of meat, where it's like chicken nuggets for chicken, hamburgers for beef, et cetera, you know, lamb patties for lamb, et cetera. I think those are the sorts of products where it's easier to manufacture it, for one thing, and it's also easier, if the taste is different or whatever, to masquerade it with like a little bit of seasoning, a little bit of sauce, or that sort of thing.
When you get a Hot Pocket in 2045, is there really going to be a grown animal?
It's not meat now.
It's made from locally sourced organic pockets.
But you know, about like 5 years ago, I want to say it was a big hot topic in the world of philosophy of just like, when are we going to finally just like end eating animals? Because we recognize that they have rights and all these things, and that eventually in a long enough timeline, our factory farm situation is just going to look barbaric.
Yeah, I mean, it already doesn't look great.
It does, but like I think Sam Harris and Peter Singer both compared factory farming to slavery, to bring it back up again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's an extreme argument. I don't really buy that as a thing. But they're saying it's going to be like morally equivalent in terms of like how repulsed people will be looking back once we're able to technologically get past the need to actually, you know, kill animals in the way that we do now.
I think that's fair. And I think, you know, I was thinking about like the perspective of history. We all like to think of ourselves in the past as being like, I would have been one of the people who was against the Nazis, slavery, or whatever. And it's like, actually, no, probably you would not have been. Like, most people were not. Most people were on board with this shit because everyone else was. And I think in 40 years, we'll look back at this time and have the same sort of thing. We just don't know what those societal changes are going to be. All these things that were ordinary 60 years ago that are atrocious now that you just would never dream of doing, that seemed normal at the time. It seemed fine. And that, I think, is a change we just can never really anticipate, but you have to be open to it. And I think this is definitely one of those.
One other model that I was thinking about earlier today was like ivory, you know? Or we used to make things out of bone, and now it's like archaic and barbaric, but you know, and immoral maybe in the sense of ivory or something like that. But, you know, I don't think it's in the same realm as slavery or something like that.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how the morals evolve.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think where, you know, ivory is something where, you know, that's a luxury good and it's not something that is needed, right? We need to eat something.
Right.
And a lot of what we eat is also so tied to culture. It's so tied down to identity. And Danny Myers, who started Shake Shack and is a huge restaurateur, you know, one of the things that I thought was super interesting about his book was he talked about food as nostalgia. And so, like, when he was coming up with Shake Shack, he was like, if you grew up eating In-N-Out, Shake Shack will never be as good as In-N-Out because, like, that just got in there early when you were eating. And so, like, the taste of that burger still pops in that way. I grew up eating In-N-Out, so it will always be better than Shake Shack for me, right?
Which is also just objectively true. Shake Shack's fine.
It's fine.
But it's
fine.
In-N-Out.
You're also a native Californian, so we're supposed to say that.
Also objectively correct.
Yeah. So I think about that with regards to the entire cuisine that is surrounded meat for most cultures, right? And like, how do you really replace that? Like that's somewhere deep inside of us. And it will take a while. I mean, the biggest comeback in the world has been Brussels sprouts, right? But what is an entire cuisine that shifts from, you know, what we traditionally know as meat to something that is approximating it?
Yeah. And I think, to me, that is the promise of the lab-grown meat, is that it could replace that without you noticing. Theoretically, anyway, that it could taste exactly the same, have the exact same mouthfeel and exact same taste profile, and you wouldn't have to have the factory farms and the unethical treatment of animals and the constant like antibiotics and all this crap. Like, you could have something much better.
Right.
And I think when you can have the same quality without any of those downsides, I think you can hang on to that nostalgia. And I think that's, to me, why this is a scalable thing. This is a thing that can really impact things at scale because of that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's where in doing this episode, I was just like, yeah, like, this is going to happen. This is just inevitable at this point.
You know, one thing that I didn't think about while watching this episode until just now is the convincing people part of this. as it relates to conspiracy theories and how more easily they get a foothold now. And if people are replacing what's in grocery stores with these cell cultured meats, and they're not telling people about it, you might actually get people being like, look what they're doing to the food supply in very weird ways. And, the ways in which like anti-vax conversations have just exploded recently. And now that stuff was pretty out in the open in terms of what the science was.
Yeah.
And not as much of a financial incentive as there would be for feeding the entire planet. Because conspiracy theories could actually be a pretty strong governor against adoption here.
More than price, though? Because I think the point that you made earlier is super interesting, right? Like when this is cheaper and tastes better, and also you just don't even recognize it, like at what point does that really matter? I mean, you look at something where it says like, I see the avocado that says organic and the avocado that says not organic, and one is half the price of the other. Like,
fair point.
Right. And also entrenched lobbying interests, like the Cattlemen's Association. Or
is Nick about to talk about corn?
I'm not going to talk about corn.
Nick loves corn.
But no, I've got the shock collar on. I'm not allowed to talk about corn subsidies. Sorry, yeah.
This episode presented by corn.
It's corn.
I can't imagine a more beautiful thing. I think there's also this entrenched economic interests of other people that, to your point of like, if I'm sneaking this into my supply chain thing, if I'm Cisco Foods and I'm supplying all these restaurants and suddenly 80% of the products I offer are cultured meat, I have a feeling their other customer or their other vendors are going to have something to say about that. And I think there is going to be a cultural dialogue about this. And one of the reasons that I think is interesting about or one of the things I think is interesting about this particular episode is we were looking at cell-cultured chicken.
Right.
And chicken is interesting because a lot of chicken production is not centralized. There are huge factory farms. There are these, but a lot of people just have a couple chickens. And in the United States, all over the world, these are animals that are just much more like compact and easy to raise in smaller conditions. And so there isn't that concentrated set of interests that you see with cattle. And so I wonder if by starting with producing chicken, there's a bit of a easier on-ramp for these kinds of technologies because there isn't that same concentrated set of interests.
Yeah, I totally think it's going to be a debate. And it's one we've seen in the past with videos on like GMO fish, for example. It's like, can you call it salmon, for example? And you'll have, Alaskan fishermen who are lobbying against that. And even if you look today and you'll get snack foods and it's like cream, CREME, And so now we'll have like chicken, CHIK''N and stuff like that, Probably it's going to happen.
I want to play devil's advocate about cell-cultured meat and cell-cultured chicken in particular and talk about the inputs for this. Like, do we think this can scale? Are we ever going to be able to create the inputs we need for these sorts of things in a sustainable way? I'm curious what you guys think are the obstacles to making this into a substitute for what is already one of the largest protein sources on Earth.
So one thing I've seen is the argument that because this has to be currently manufactured in pharmaceutical grade facilities, it will never be able to scale and be as cheap as one would assume just based on the usual curve of technology.
Right.
Because when you're creating a cell culture, it's actually similar to how they make certain sorts of medical products, and any sort of contamination can totally ruin the batch. So it's not like beer where you can have these gigantic towers that are just kind of food grade, hygiene. Instead, you need really expensive equipment. And so I've seen some skepticism pushing back against it being a mass market thing on those grounds. On the other hand, I have seen, news stories about this company in Israel is making $5 lab-grown nuggets or something like that. So I don't really know what the full picture is like.
Yeah. And as I recall, actually, even in one of our interviews for this doc, one of the experts we interviewed said, when we can go from pharmaceutical grade to food grade, that will really be a huge improvement in the price. I don't know that they said it was a deal breaker for them, but I know it would be a huge watershed moment for them to be able to scale.
Yeah, the regulatory environment seems like the biggest hurdle for getting this to go to the next stage. I don't know how much that's going to change versus some of the other things in terms of just consumer behavior, but they have to figure out the regulatory environment. Singapore is a country that has a bit of a better regulatory environment for lots of things in general, except for drugs. But
and spankings.
Yeah, very strange. But for businesses, the regulatory environment is really favorable in places like Singapore, and so that's going to be helpful. The other wild card is China. China almost single-handedly helped lower the cost of solar panels because they just put so much effort and money and activity into it. They might do the same thing with stuff like cell-cultured meat because it might just be beneficial for them because they have 1 billion people that they need to feed eventually, and this might be easier than farmland and help with some of their climate change goals at the same time. So, but yeah, I think it's all comes down to the state eventually.
Yeah. I think the other big devil's advocate aspect of this is, should we be eating as much meat as we are? Because, the demand for meat is only increasing, which is why I think the price of making this sort of stuff is going to decrease over time. But the larger question is our diets, which are just so much more meat intensive than they used to be.
Yeah, I know. It's really awesome.
I got him. He's choking on a ribeye over there.
In what sense do you mean that? In terms of like the climate change stuff, or even is eating as much meat as we do good for our bodies?
I just keep thinking about him choking on the meat.
Let's make sure he's okay. Is he okay? You got the bone out? All right. He's good. You were asking a follow-up.
Yeah. So you said that change to our diets. Like, should we be eating as much meat as we are currently eating? Do you mean that in terms of like meat's impact on the environment, or do you mean that just like meat's impact on our physical bodies?
I think on our physical bodies. I mean, I think the New York Times just had an article not so long ago that was just like, basically no matter what you do as an American, you're probably going to be a diabetic or pre-diabetic. Right. Just because the nature of like how we've built the built environment, and we're not exercising as much, we're eating more meat, and we're drinking more, and like all these things are just contributing to a factor where we're just less healthy. And so it's a question of whether what is the ideal diet that people should be having.
But maybe you could grow chicken with the insulin already in it.
Yeah, I like it.
Insulin nuggets? Yeah.
Insulin nuggets.
Diabetic chicken.
I think you're onto something.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, I mean, and we cover this in a different episode, but it's really thinking differently about, okay, a lot of times with a Western diet or an American diet, like you think about the protein first, you think about the meat first, and then you like throw some side dishes on the side, right? to help soak up the gravy that needs to get associated with the meat, right? And so is that really how we should be thinking about this? And really in a world where we are exposed to, and it is so accessible to get every flavor,
right?
Should we be thinking about flavor first? Right. I want to have like an Indian tasting thing or a Thai tasting thing or a Mexican tasting thing today, and then figuring out, okay, what portion of that is meat and not meat.
Right. Yeah, I think that's definitely a good point, that like culturally more and more people prioritize meat than we used to. And I think, part of that is economics, where it's become more affordable, and part of that is because of subsidies. And I think that if we were hard resetting the whole meat economy, I think even if we didn't bring cell-cultured meat into it, I think people would be eating a lot less meat. I
have asked my nutritionist several times, and she is very resistant towards answering me. I'm like, what is the Soylent Green that I could actually do? I either want to have a delicious meal, or I want to just consume my calories as quickly as possible. Like when I look at my baby drinking formula, I'm like, why can't I just be getting that?
They have Soylent.
Yeah, they have it. I haven't heard like anyone really loving it.
You can also just put stuff into a blender. If you really wanted to go there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was watching a video with Zac Efron talking about his workout routine when
steroids?
No, it's just a lot of protein. He was
also
like,
be put in a blender.
Yeah. He was like, I got so sick of eating chicken that I just started putting chicken and water into a blender and just drinking that. To which I was like, I do not want to be that buff.
Yeah. Well, he also takes steroids.
What did the audience think of this idea? What did they think of the video? What were some of their questions? I would love to hear, Toby, what you observed in the comment sections across all the platforms.
So interestingly, we actually had a number of the things that we've mentioned so far came up and were different reactions from different sets of people. So we had people who were like just super excited about it and are like, this is going to be great for the environment and wonderful. And then we had people who were like, well, you know, as long as it's cheaper, I'll eat it. I don't really care. And then we had people who were like, this is gross, it's unnatural, I don't like it. And then we had people who were like, this is Soylent Green, it's a conspiracy, the elites will still eat nuggets.
The elites will eat nuggets.
I can confirm that. As an elite, I will still eat chicken nuggets because I love that pink slime they put in. Let's be honest, chicken nuggets at McDonald's, delicious. Also, not exactly natural. Like not exactly the least processed thing on the planet. So I find that sort of a weird objection of like, well, the elites will still have their chicken nuggets. Like,
Are chicken nuggets good or just sauce is good? That's really a question. That's the poll that we should be asking in this YouTube. What is the best dipping sauce?
okay, honey mustard is great. I as a child, I hated it, but as an adult, I've grown to love it.
Okay.
But I do think the nuggets are good. I actually think they are good, especially with a tiny bit of salt, which I noticed they've been putting less in lately.
They're trying to help your heart out.
No one goes to McDonald's for a healthy meal.
They have salads.
McDonald's, yeah, that salad
Raise
place.
your hand if you bought a salad at McDonald's.
Whoa. Wow.
I have once and I would never do it again.
Okay.
Yeah, no, they're terrible.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to get that out of the way. So chicken nuggets are objectively good on their own. And I think it's the meat itself is well seasoned and the breading is good. And what I learned is that one of our team members, not in this room, like a psychopath, peels their chicken nuggets and eats the breading separately from the meat. And then I tried it and I think they are right.
That is insane.
Wow. Does he put the skin on his face?
I was stunned by this revelation, but I tried to keep an open mind about everything. The show is Hard Reset, right?
Now, were you eating in a McDonald's or were people watching you as you were
Was they using a fork and knife?
We have to try this now.
You do have to try it. It's an interesting experience because it helps you separate the taste of the meat from the breading. And guess what? They're both pretty good.
Okay.
So I defend chicken McNuggets from McDonald's.
Great.
So
Any other hot takes, Nick?
I researched this. It's not a hot take. I have the data to back it up. So I find that to be a surprising argument that like the rich will still have their McNuggets.
Yes, the food the rich are known for. The nugget. There was also a few questions and a few like pushback points. One thing we mentioned in the episode that people did kind of a double take at was the idea that chickens are smarter than dolphins or a human 4-year-old.
I guess it depends on the 4-year-old.
Very fair.
So is there like a source? Is there a citation that we want to...
Yeah, there were a couple. I think you
Context
did some follow up on that.
And the biggest thing when it comes to animal cognition is that a lot of the stuff that we think about animals and how smart they are is wrong. And a lot of the research was, there was just lots of bad science in the ways that we formulated and talked about how smart things like dolphins are and how stupid things like chickens are. We are now in a place where our science around animal cognition is much, much better. There's a gentleman by the name of Justin Craig. He's an animal cognition scientist, and he wrote an article for Salon that was specifically like, hey, chickens are much smarter than we think, and here are the ways in which they're smart. And he wrote a book about dolphins called Are Dolphins Really Smart? And in the beginning of the book, he lists all these different cognitive traits, and you're thinking, oh, this is a really smart animal. Obviously, it's about a dolphin. No, all these things are about chickens. There's a bunch of burgeoning research right now on chicken cognitive awareness and how smart they are. There was a recent meta-analysis by a scientist by the name of Lori Marino. The journal article was Thinking Chickens, a review of cognition, emotion, and behavior in the domestic chicken. And it was staggering, all the types of cognitive behavior that chickens had that you would not think that they have. So Are they smarter than a dolphin? No, that was probably like too much for us to say. Are they smarter than a 4-year-old? Like, no, probably too much for us to say. But what we can say is that things that we used to reserve for animals like us, dolphins or children, chickens.
One of my favorite animals.
Sneak into us.
Well, we anthropomorphize them so much, but a lot of their cognitive traits that we thought was specially for those types of animals are also exhibited in chickens.
Right.
And so we're learning just a lot more about how smart other animals are, and chickens are one of those animals.
Yeah.
Well, Toby, now that you point out this comment, I just think the fact that we included this point in the video is probably stupid anyway, because why does this matter, right? Like you could only eat, I mean, that was the point, right? Are we only okay with eating dumb animals and not okay with eating smart animals? And are we okay with eating not cute animals and we have to save the cute animals? Like, where are our values and morality around like
this is all incredibly arbitrary.
Yeah.
And it, like, we definitely, what we can and can't project our emotions onto are the thing. It seems to be the dividing line, where you can have a really smart chicken and a really dumb kitten, but it's a lot easier to anthropomorphize the kitten because it's got these big eyes and it's a mammal and it purrs and does all these things that sort of you're evolved to respond to, and the chicken just goes like, and you're like, what is this? Yeah. Kill it, eat it, it's delicious.
it's not going to fly away.
Yeah, and the kitten might taste like pumpkin pie, but we never know because it's so cute.
Yeah, but also, like, there's actual laws against killing some animals, and we based a lot of those laws on the fact that we thought they were really smart.
Right.
Like, that is the reason, one of the reasons why we have protective laws against dolphins versus, like, other types of fish is like, oh, they're the smart ones. It's like, well, no. So, like, what should we do? And you think about this with non-human primates and just so many other animals. We've taken their special traits that we thought were special to them and much like us and be like, we're giving you rights.
Right.
Like, primates have rights. Non-human primates have rights in, like, France, I believe now. There was, like, a law that passed that gave them things that are closer to human rights. Like, we judge the abilities of animals and their worthiness often. And that's kind of weird when we actually don't know that much about whether, like, the distance between our abilities and theirs.
Well, and also, a lot of these conversations about animal intelligence and human intelligence sort of create the impression of a spectrum of intelligence from, like, really dumb to really smart.
Right.
And it is not a one-dimensional spectrum.
No, not at all.
That you can have animals that are far more intelligent than humans in some respect, and just not as socially intelligent, don't have the linguistic abilities, don't have the, but a lot of non-human primates are much more visually intelligent than humans because that's the skill set they evolved with. And they might not have the same kind of social reasoning or language skills, but that doesn't mean they're not smarter in some respects.
Right.
I've heard that analogy where it's like, are cats or dogs smarter? Well, a cat is going to be better at being a cat than a dog will ever be, no matter how smart the dog is, and vice versa. So you're optimized for the particular set of scenarios.
Yeah.
I am sort of wondering if they're at all comparable, whether you could replace, like, a SeaWorld dolphin show with a chicken. Like, could you train it to, like, balance a ball on its nose?
I mean, lots of animals can be trained to do really entertaining things. There's cat circuses, and you would think cats are untrainable, but they have people who dedicate a lot of time and energy to training cats to do cool tricks.
Nick is promoting his cat circus.
If you'd like to learn how to train your cat,
Nick's masterclass.
But so, yeah, I think, I believe there are some trained chickens that I've seen before where people are training them to do all sorts of cool things, but maybe not leaping out of a pool 14 feet. But yeah,
well, yes.
If you can do it, take my money. I'm coming to that show.
One of my favorite mean comments that was left in this was, don't you ever use flightless and delicious in the same sentence. I don't know where that's coming from, but some people have very strong opinions about it.
Wow, all right.
I mean,
they're both true. Let's be honest.
Is it the flightless thing that's the problem?
I don't know. Maybe he was...
I mean, there are a lot of flightless, delicious animals, but chicken is sort of like the chief among them.
Yeah. We also had a bunch of people who were sort of, reactively, very pro-meat. So you also had people who were like, you know what, I love killing chickens. I want to taste the suffering, and that sort of like, rah, 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 rah kind of attitude. And you also had people who were like, but plants are really bad for the environment, or monocropping, which I think is, yeah. I mean, because you also have to grow plants to feed animals if you're going to eat animals.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure a lot of these trade-offs make a lot of sense. So, I mean, I do agree monocropping is bad, but we already do that.
Yeah.
And we just seem to continue to do that, more and more of that. So I'm not sure that you have to choose one or the other. You can have biodiversity and probably more biodiversity if you weren't making so much feed corn or things like that. Yeah.
I think you get a sense in some cases where there's like sort of good faith arguments and stuff like that where people are thinking about it thoughtfully. And then you have cases where people are sort of reactively defensive and they just come up with an argument. But like if you were thinking like, I am genuinely someone who cares about making the earth sustainable, you wouldn't be like, we got to get rid of vegetables, or something like that.
I think that there's something to the ew factor, right? Because what we've been talking about in terms of widespread adoption is people's just like, when they see it on a package, does that make them go ew, right?
Yeah.
What was the Bill Gates thing with regards to drinking reclaimed water? And people just like, I just don't like the way it sounds. Like you could give me all the tests, tell me that, everything's fine, that it's even more pure than Fiji water. And yet still, I just cannot wrap my head around that. And I get that.
Yeah, well, I think there's also like some weirdness where it's like we talk about food grown in a lab and that just feels artificial because you're just like saying it that way versus how your recognized food is. But like most food is grown around like quite literally. It's all types of disgusting stuff. Like you would never like pick a piece of food off the ground and eat it from the place where your food is grown. But you would if it was on the table on a lab bench, probably would.
There's no greater testament to cognitive dissonance than the fact that I've been to a pig farm and still eat pork. Yeah, the way we do things now is awful. Like the animals suffer. We don't seem to enjoy being there very much. I can personally attest to that. And there's just a lot of things that are awful about it. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for them. And we just sort of accept it because we don't see it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you drive down I-5 by Coalinga and see the just packed in cattle, you can't help but start to question, why are we doing this? Why are we doing it this way? It seems awful. It smells awful for miles around.
It's disgusting, yeah.
It's awful.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting that people will defend the way things we are out of this sort of sense of inertia with such vehemence when the way things are is not great.
Well, it's a habit, right? And I think this is one of the things that we tried to cover in the end of the episode was Chef Kaimina talking about trying to get people to eat in Hawaii plant-based mayo.
Right.
And even if the mayo tastes as good or better than, real mayo, that is hard to get people to change their habits.
Yeah.
And so, I'm used to eating things and it's kind of like this and blah, blah, blah. And like, so that's what I want to continue to do. But, what it comes down to, like, we need to make some hard decisions right now.
Right.
In terms of how we're going to do this. And I think fortunately, and what's exciting about this show is that we're at the point with a lot of this technology to where we are going to be able to do all these things that we've been talking about in science fiction novels and movies for decades and decades. The question is, will we adopt them from like a cultural standpoint? Like we have the technology, do we have the will?
Right.
This is, to me, one of the biggest no-brainers. There's very little downside, there's all upside. And you probably can't even tell the difference.
Yeah. Are there any things that we should have dove deeper into? Are there things that we didn't get a chance to explore that you feel strongly about? Or Rob, any questions that you, as from the editorial side of things, felt that we didn't cover well?
I think one of the things in the episode that we sort of glossed over and we talked about it here is just like how do they actually scale, and the food grade versus pharmaceutical grade plus some other things like that. But it does seem like, okay, great, do it. like we're almost at that point, and so having a deeper understanding of why we're not at that point in the episode would have been, I think, have been awesome. Not to substitute, but to expand.
Right.
make it longer and go deeper.
I like that Nick's using this as a moment to get notes and feedback. So, yeah, I want my 360 review now, please.
On camera in front of everyone.
I prefer all feedback in the form of effusive praise. That's the best sentence I've ever ended a person. They asked. But I'm curious, were there topics that you don't feel like we got a chance to cover as much as you wanted?
I want people to talk about the taste and experience of this, right? And we were a little limited with travel on this, but yeah, at the end of the day, this comes down to people's reactions with it. And what I'm most curious about from this episode is what people do with it once it's ubiquitous and it's in grocery stores, right? Because we talk about all the foods that beef bourguignon and like all these foods that are like at fine dining restaurants and are like the pinnacle of cuisine, and they started off as quote unquote poor people food, right?
Right.
And then we figured out how to make those things even more flavorful and, all that. What are people going to be doing with this? Like, how is this going to change cuisine and change culture?
Right.
And I'm curious to see how people explore this. Mm-hmm. This to me is kind of like where 3D printing was like 10 years ago,
right?
Where you're just like, okay, there's a 3D printer, it can do some stuff. It's not perfect. It's kind of expensive, but like we're going to do something.
Right.
And now they're 3D printing a base on the moon.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, it's what you talked about, the experience of like because of the travel, we weren't able to go to Singapore. This is during the pandemic. So we had to work with a local crew. And I was grateful we got the access we did. But I think for the show, it's like ideally, like we want to eat that meat. We want to.
Basically, Nick just wanted to.
I want to eat that meat.
Yeah. That's the right answer.
Yeah, exactly. And like I feel like that to me was a missed opportunity. And I hope hopefully when we do follow up, so we can do that. Because I think the audience wants to see what we think about it too.
I also think that like when I see the little chicken burger in the episode, I'm just like, I'm not down with this slider thing. Like I want a full size bun and I want like 5 of those things on it. Like let's commit to a $90 chicken burger.
I think that'd be exactly. Very expensive hamburger, but a very expensive fried chicken sandwich. But yeah, I'm down.
Yeah.
Rob, that's okay, right?
Well,
Rob says
it makes me think of like the 2 Chainz show on Vice where he just like gets the most expensive food.
You expect somebody to eat a plate that pretty? That's a pretty plate, man. Make me want to frame that plate. That's just pretty, man.
Like what's the most expensive version you could do?
That's what I want.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes there is a gap because, you can read as many articles as you want as like this lab brewed milk, for example. I've had lab brewed milk and it does not taste like milk. I read a lot of it being chemically identical and it does not taste chemically identical. So I'm curious whether that's really borne out. And also the other thing is we also did this episode on vertical farms where they're doing like all these different wavelengths of light to bring out specific flavors. So like what you're saying, like, is there, the version 2.0 or whatever of this where they can figure out what makes, a particular meat taste so good and make more of it, and customize it. So it's not just replicating meat, but going beyond it.
We need the IPA of chicken nuggets.
I think we have different flavor associations with that. I do not want the IPA of chicken nuggets.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. The sort of possibilities of this are really interesting. And I do like the idea, the image that we came up with of like the ribeye made out of chicken meat, because I love ribeye steaks and I love chicken. Mm-hmm. What would that taste like if it was the same amalgam together? Like, I want to try that. Can you just have the seasoning kind of built 3D printed in so it's very uniformly distributed or not? I think there's a lot of fun things you can do when you start to explore these technologies. And yes, and you won't know until it's really exposed to hobbyists and people who are like, I just want to try and mess around with it. And once more people start cooking it at home and adding, like the right sauces, the seasoning, the preparations, that's the sort of big creativity that takes these things from, a niche into something that is just on every table.
Yeah, I am really curious as to how this actually changes people's kitchens at home, right? You have a vertical farm in your house now, right?
I do.
That's super interesting. Like, that doesn't happen 10 years ago, in quite the same way, at quite the same price point.
Right, unless you were growing marijuana.
Yeah, different price point.
Different price point.
Exactly. And so, I got an Instant Pot a few years ago, and I was like, oh, we're going to throw away this crock pot. I'm never going to cook that chicken. I'm like, this Instant Pot is magical. It does all these different things. So like what are the Instapot type, of equipment that comes when you can actually do this like lab grown meat, or like, it might not be lab grown, it might be grown like in your kitchen.
Kitchen grown meat.
Kitchen grown meat.
That would be
Instant
crazy.
pork.
Yeah.
It's a pork.
Yeah. Nick is going to just have like a Rube Goldberg machine where it just like it gets grown and then it just goes directly into the deep fry.
Yeah, I just want a city utility that pumps nutrient feedstock into my house.
Yeah. And then like a little mini drone that takes it out and then goes to Nick's bedroom and just dunks it in his mouth.
Yeah, I never leave bed. That's the dream. That's the dream.
So Nick, tell me, is there any updates with Eat Just, and what is happening with their technology? Are they getting any approvals places? What's just going on with them since we've made this episode?
Yeah, so they continue to sell cultured chicken in Singapore. When I looked this morning, they still are working with some local restaurants. They're actually doing some delivery options as well through a local delivery app. I think that they're continuing to grow that operation there. I think the price come down a little bit. Probably the more interesting development has happened here in the United States, where Upside Foods, which is a similar type of company, they're doing cultured meat as well, has gotten FDA approval to begin the process of selling it. So I think we will start to see this on the market here in the United States any day now. It's just a question of how quickly they can start to build a scalable operation.
Is that chicken specifically, or is it different?
I believe I want to say it's beef.
Ooh. Yeah, I think that's the other thing we should mention is like this is not just about chicken, right?
Yeah, you can do this with any kind of protein.
Fish, and there's even a company we might do an episode on within the future that is about what's happening with regards to trying to make sushi grade fish.
Right.
That is not like fish out of the water.
Right. So there's a bunch of different startups in this, Upside, Finless Foods, and a few others that are really trying to bring all these different kinds of meat. And we chose chicken specifically because it was actually out in the world. Like you could go and buy it and taste it, and it's a real thing. But it's really only a matter of time before these other meats are on the market as well. One of the other things that we often like to talk about is, because our audience is very interested in trying things themselves, that DIY aspect is how can you get involved? With this one, because it is very much a niche industry that's still being developed, and I think you'd have to work at one of these companies to get your hands on these things and start playing around with them. But really the technology is kind of simple, where it is a brewer's vat. So I'm curious how long you guys think it'll be before there are DIY cell-cultured meat kits on the market.
On the market, I'm not sure. I bet you there's some that somebody's cobbled together already, though. And so I do wonder, because, people are hacking DIY CRISPR and doing all types of stuff. Like, I don't think this is more complex than that.
No, it's
I'm sure Josiah Zahner has one in his
Yeah. So
garage right now.
I do wonder how soon it will be until we have a story that comes our way where somebody has just built this in their garage, essentially, and has found the home brewer's kit version of that.
If you're that person, please reach out.
I grow meat in my garage. I'm on Hinge.
So what are your hobbies?
I want to meet that person. I'm just saying right now, if you are that person, call me.
This is also something that comes up all the time in the comments is, what if we made human meat?
Oh, wow. Somebody's watching that Timothée Chalamet cannibal movie.
Yeah. So I think that's a great question.
Toby, have you ever thought about eating a human?
There used to be.
That's supposed to be a quick no. Anything less is unacceptable.
For a while, there was a product called Hufo or something. It was like tofu human.
Wait.
It was
Rob, you might want to start running.
I never tried it, but it was one of those things that was on like late night shows, where it's like this crazy company has made essentially fake meat, but the old school version.
So Impossible Burger of your neighbor.
Yeah. Impossible Steve.
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised people took it there because, if you can do this with chicken and you can do it with beef, you could do it with human. But What a nightmare. What a nightmare scenario that is.
I was feeling real positive today, and now this has got real dystopian.
Right.
Look, everything is weird unless you're used to it.
I think it makes me uncomfortable it's hard to articulate why, which makes me think actually that is a really good question because it does force you to articulate why you are uncomfortable. Is there a legitimate reason to be uncomfortable about this, or is it just
You should be uncomfortable about the idea of eating human meat.
even if no one died or suffered to make it?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably right.
Yeah.
It seems awful.
Yeah.
But actually, I did do some Googling on that because it came up, and there are actually some specific problems with eating human meat, like prion diseases and things like that. You should not eat the meat of your own species. It actually turns out there's an evolutionary reason for that.
Yeah, so I mean, that's why it grosses us out, I think, is that it's so both unhealthy and antisocial. You know what I mean? It's not like...
I'm just guessing what other people would say.
I've heard.
There's going to be some cannibal story that happens in like a month in Florida, let's just guess, and then they're going to link to this podcast.
Right. Spurred on by his favorite podcast hosts.
Oh, good.
Toby. Just Toby.
Just Toby, the new
don't eat human meat.
3D printed or otherwise. The only version of cell cultured human meat that would be good is for transplants, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if you could grow muscle and then you could replace muscle that people lost, that'd be fantastic. And so that'd be a great use of that technology. Turn it into like a really nice dish. That's for Hannibal Lecter and no one else.
I mean, there's gonna be leftovers.
And I have some Chianti in the fridge.
I wonder if you make the equivalent of hot dogs, you know, because it's just like all the odds and ends. You might as well use them.
Is this thing on?
Yeah.
But that was actually a question. That was a better question that came up in the comments was like, why aren't they using this to make organs or make things? And people are, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or trying to. I don't think it's exactly the same process. But
It's
people
not
are certainly
completely,
trying
but
to.
we're trying to do similar things for sure.
Yeah. So, Toby, I'm curious, what were some of the meanest comments we got?
Okay. Well, we got puke emoji, puke emoji, puke emoji. Exactly three many times. Like, great minds think alike. That was.
I mean, it's the rule of threes.
Yeah. 3 puke emojis out of a possible 4, perhaps.
Right. Unless you're commenting about lab-grown cannibalist meat.
I apologize earlier. I misquoted this. The actual quote is, "Don't ever put delicious and flightless on the same sentence again, you psychopath."
I'll take that.
So that was the mean part of it.
That's
that
fair.
was particularly. Yeah. Again, I don't know if that is pro or anti-flightless bird. And this is all caps to make sure we saw it. No exclamation points. Give me the real chicken, exclamation points. God, the creator of all animals, approves the killing of animals for food, exclamation points. Don't settle for a fake nugget, exclamation points.
So God only approves real nuggets.
Yes.
Okay. It seems strange that she would have such a specific ruling on nuggets.
On the 8th day, God created the nugget.
I mean, she did a great job with the nuggets. It's hard to argue.
And that actually segues into perhaps the final mean comment. Why? Just why? From username, Chicken Nuggets.
I can see why they took that personally. It's nothing personal, Chicken Nuggets.
Yeah. I mean,
We love you, Chicken Nuggets.
these are chicken nuggets.
Yeah. We want to take some of the burden off of Chicken Nuggets. So, fair. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for this episode of the Hard Reset podcast. It was a lot of fun to talk about these really cool ideas with really cool people. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, subscribe, and if you have questions or comments or things that you think that we should be digging into more in this area, please put that in the comments below.
To McDonald's.
To McDonald's!
I'll get a salad.